The rain poured relentlessly as Damien Cole sat slumped in the back seat of his luxury car, staring at the foreclosure notice in his trembling hands. Just months ago, he was a billionaire, a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence. Now he was on the brink of losing it all. His empire, built over decades, was crumbling. A string of bad investments, betrayals from trusted allies, and a financial scandal had dragged him from the heights of luxury to the edge of ruin. The world, once at his feet, now mocked him. As his car idled near a dimly lit street corner, he noticed a boy, no older than 10, huddled beneath an abandoned newspaper stand, sheltering from the rain. The boy's clothes were tattered, his frame small and fragile. Yet his eyes held a defiance Damien hadn't seen in a long time. With a heavy sigh, Damien rolled down the window. "Hey, kid, you should be somewhere warm." The boy turned his head slowly, as if sizing him up. "Nowhere warm for me," he said, "unless you got a spare mansion lying around." Damien chuckled bitterly. "Not anymore." The boy studied him, then walked closer. "You look like one of those rich guys who lost everything. What happened? Bad luck or bad choices?" Damien let out a weary laugh. "Both." The boy nodded knowingly. "Name's Jaden. I don't have much, but I know how to survive. You look like you need a survival lesson." Something in the boy's blunt honesty struck a chord in Damien. Here he was, a man who once closed million-dollar deals over champagne dinners, now getting life advice from a street kid. And yet, he couldn't ignore the truth in Jaden's words. 3 months earlier, Damien Cole had stood at the pinnacle of his success. At 52, he was the CEO and founder of Cole Enterprises, a multinational corporation with interests in technology, real estate, and finance. His net worth had surpassed $12 billion. He owned penthouses in New York, London, and Hong Kong, a fleet of luxury cars, and a private jet. Business magazines featured him on their covers with headlines like "The Unstoppable Damien Cole" and "The Modern Midas." But behind the glittering facade, cracks had begun to form. His most ambitious project, a revolutionary smart city initiative in Southeast Asia, was hemorrhaging money due to unforeseen regulatory hurdles and technical challenges. His trusted CFO, Marcus Reeves, had been embezzling funds for years, creating a financial black hole that was discovered too late. The final blow came when a whistleblower leaked documents suggesting that Cole Enterprises had bribed government officials to secure contracts. While Damien himself hadn't authorized the bribes, they had happened under his watch. The scandal erupted, sending his company's stock into freefall. Investors pulled out. Creditors called in their loans. The board of directors, once flattering in their praise, orchestrated a coup that ousted him from his own company. His so-called friends, the elites who had clinked glasses with him at galas and charity events, vanished as quickly as his fortune. His wife of 20 years, Miranda, had left him only weeks after the scandal broke. "I married Damien Cole, the billionaire," she had said coldly as she packed her designer bags. "Not Damien Cole, the disgrace." Their shared social circle, the yacht club members, the charity board trustees, the fellow residents of their exclusive Manhattan building had closed ranks against him. Overnight, he became a pariah in the very world he'd helped build. Now, as he sat in his car, one of the few luxury possessions he still owned, Damien felt a hollowness he had never known before. The foreclosure notice was for his penthouse, the last of his properties, not yet liquidated to pay creditors. His legal team had abandoned him after he couldn't pay their exorbitant fees. His reputation was in tatters. His bank accounts, once flush with billions, now held barely enough to keep him afloat for a few more months. And yet, as he looked at the street Ted peering at him through the car window, Damien felt something unexpected, a connection to another human being that wasn't predicated on what he could offer them. "So, rich guy," Jaden continued, his voice cutting through Damien's thoughts, "you got a name?" "Damien," he replied, deliberately omitting his surname, which had been plastered across newspaper headlines for weeks. "Well, Damien," Jaden said, "if you're just gonna sit there looking sad, might as well make yourself useful. I'm hungry, and I bet you still got some cash for food." The boy's directness was startling, but not unwelcome. It had been weeks since anyone had spoken to Damien without derision or pity. He reached for his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill, a sum that once would have seemed trivial, but now represented a significant percentage of his liquid assets. "Here," he said, extending the money toward Jaden. "Get yourself something to eat." Jaden looked at the bill, then back at Damien with suspicion. "What's the catch?" "No catch, just get some food." The boy hesitated, then snatched the bill with the quickness of someone accustomed to having things taken away. "There's a diner around the corner. They don't kick me out if I have money. You should come too. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Damien realized the boy was right. He'd been subsisting on coffee and whatever snacks he could grab from convenience stores, too depressed to bother with proper meals. The thought of sitting in a diner with a street kid seemed absurd, but no more absurd than the rest of his recent life. "All right," he agreed, stepping out of the car. He hesitated, then locked it, aware that it might be repossessed soon anyway. The diner was a greasy spoon type of place, with cracked vinyl booths and a perpetually tired-looking waitress. As they settled into a booth, Damien noticed the stares from other patrons, a disheveled man in an expensive but wrinkled suit accompanied by a dirty street kid made for an unusual sight. Jaden ordered a burger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake with the confidence of someone making a once-in-a-blue-moon splurge. Damien, despite his dwindling funds, ordered the same. "So," Jaden said, taking a noisy slurp of his milkshake when it arrived, "what did you do before you lost everything? Rob a bank? Sell drugs?" Damien couldn't help but smile at the boy's blunt questions. "I was a businessman. I built things. Buildings, companies, technologies. Like Tony Stark. Less weaponry, more software and real estate. But yes, I was wealthy, powerful." "So, what happened?" Damien paused, considering how to explain corporate scandal and financial ruin to a 10-year-old. "I trusted the wrong people, made some bad decisions, and when things went wrong, everyone I thought was on my side turned against me." Jaden nodded sagely, as if Damien's tale of high-stakes betrayal was perfectly familiar to him. "That's how it goes. People only like you when you got something they want." There was such world-weary wisdom in the boy's voice that Damien felt a wave of sadness. "How old are you, Jaden?" 10, I think. My birthday's in summer, but I'm not sure which day." And where are your parents?" The boy's face hardened. "Mum died when I was 6. Don't know who my dad is. Been in foster homes since, but I run away. They're all the same. People who want the government check, but don't want me." "So, you live on the streets? Alone?" Jaden shrugged, focusing intently on his burger. "Sometimes. There's a shelter I go to when it's really cold, but they ask too many questions. I know places to sleep where cops and other kids don't bother me. I get by." As they ate, Damien learned more about Jaden's life, the abandoned building where he'd been sleeping, the convenience store owners who sometimes gave him day-old sandwiches, the public library where he spent rainy days reading comic books. The boy was resourceful, intelligent, and utterly alone in the world. By the time they finished eating, the rain had stopped. Damien paid the bill, leaving a generous tip from his dwindling reserves, and stepped outside with Jaden. "Thanks for the food," the boy said, already backing away as if expecting their encounter to end. Damien hesitated. "Where will you go now?" "Got my spots," Jaden replied vaguely. "What about you?" "Back to your fancy car to feel sorry for yourself." The comment stung, but Damien couldn't deny its accuracy. "I'm staying at a hotel," he admitted. "Not a fancy one anymore, just a place to sleep while I figure out my next move." "Well, good luck with that," Jaden said, turning to leave. "Wait," Damien called. "It's still cold out." "Let me." He didn't finish the sentence, not sure what he was offering. Jaden looked at him with those too old eyes. "I'm not a charity case, rich guy. And you need to save your money, 'cause you're not good at being poor yet." With that, the boy disappeared around a corner, leaving Damien standing alone on the sidewalk, feeling both chastised and oddly motivated for the first time in months. Damien couldn't get Jaden out of his mind. The boy's resilience, his matter-of-fact acceptance of hardship, made Damien's own wallowing seem pathetic by comparison. He'd lost his fortune, yes, but he still had advantages that Jaden could only dream of: education, connections, experience, and the knowledge of what it meant to be successful. The next day, Damien returned to the same street corner, hoping to find the boy again. After an hour of waiting, Jaden appeared, doing a double-take when he spotted Damien. "You again?" the boy asked, suspicious. "What do you want?" Damien hadn't fully thought through his purpose. "I thought maybe you could use another meal." Jaden's eyes narrowed. "Look, man, I'm not into whatever weird thing you're doing. I don't need some rich guy feeling better about himself by buying me burgers." "That's not—" Damien began, then stopped. Maybe that was exactly what he was doing. "You're right. I'm sorry." He turned to leave, but Jaden's voice stopped him. "Wait. You really don't have any creepy intentions?" "None," Damien assured him. I don't have anyone else to talk to." The raw honesty of the admission hung in the air between them. Jaden studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine, but this time I know a better place to eat. Cheaper too, since you're broke now." The better place turned out to be a small Vietnamese restaurant tucked away on a side street, where Jaden was greeted warmly by the elderly owner. "This is Mrs. Nguyen," he explained to Damien. "I helped her grandson fix his bike once, and she sometimes gives me soup." Mrs. Nguyen set them up with steaming bowls of pho that cost less than half what their diner meal had. As they ate, Damien found himself asking Jayden about how he survived day to day. "First rule," Jayden said between slurps, "is knowing who to trust. Most people are looking out for themselves, but some are okay, like Mrs. Nguyen, or the guy at the newsstand who lets me take the day-old papers to use as blankets." "How do you know who to trust?" Damien asked, thinking of Marcus Reeves, his CFO, who had embezzled millions while smiling to his face every day. "You watch. Listen. See what they do when they think no one's paying attention. Words are cheap." It was such a simple philosophy, yet one Damien had forgotten in his years at the top. He'd trusted people based on credentials, recommendations, and charisma, all easily faked. He hadn't watched them when the stakes were low, when there was nothing to gain from deception. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Damien would find Jayden. They would share a meal, and the boy would offer snippets of street wisdom that were surprisingly applicable to Damien's situation. "Never sleep where everyone can see you," Jayden advised. "That's how you get robbed or worse." Damien thought of how public his downfall had been. Press conferences, newspaper headlines, television specials analyzing his failure. If he ever rebuilt anything, he'd do it quietly, away from the spotlight that had made him such an attractive target. "Always have a backup plan," Jayden continued, "and a backup for your backup." Damien had relied too heavily on his company's success, putting all his eggs in one basket. He hadn't maintained the skills that had gotten him started: the hustle, the hands-on problem-solving, the ability to pivot when necessary. 1 week into their strange friendship, Damien was evicted from his hotel room after his credit card was declined. With nowhere else to go, he slept in his car, parked in a quiet residential area where he hoped police wouldn't notice. Jayden found this hilarious when they met the next day. "Welcome to my world," he laughed. "How'd you sleep, rich guy?" "Terribly," Damien admitted, his back aching from the cramped quarters. "And I'm worried the car will be repossessed soon." "Then you better learn some real survival skills," Jayden said. "Come on, I'll show you my spot. It's not fancy, but it's dry, and the cops don't check it." Jayden's spot was an abandoned warehouse that had once stored furniture. The ground floor was empty, but the boy had created a hidden living space in a former office area on the mezzanine level, accessible only by a precarious ladder that would discourage most adults from investigating. The space contained a nest of relatively clean blankets, a backpack with Jayden's few possessions, some books pilfered from little free libraries around the city, and a collection of water bottles and non-perishable foods. "Home sweet home," Jayden said, with a hint of pride. "It's not much, but it's mine. You can crash here if you want, until you figure things out." Damien was touched by the offer. The boy, who had nothing, was willing to share his space, while Damien's wealthy friends had slammed doors in his face. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I might take you up on that." That night, lying on the hard floor of the warehouse, Damien had his first real epiphany since his fall. He'd been mourning his lost wealth as if it were his identity. But money had only ever been a tool. One he could acquire again, perhaps, but not the sum total of who he was. What Jayden had, resilience, adaptability, the ability to find joy in small victories, those were resources that couldn't be taken away by market fluctuations or betrayals. And for all his billions, Damien had never cultivated those qualities in himself. The next morning, he woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. He found a public bathroom to clean up as best he could, then went to meet Jayden for breakfast at their now usual spot. "I need to make some money," he told the boy. "What do you do when you need cash?" Jayden raised an eyebrow. "Legal ways only, 'cause I'm guessing you don't want to go to jail." "Definitely legal," Damien confirmed. "Well, there's day labor stuff. Construction sites sometimes take guys for cash, or you can find gigs on those apps, if you still have a phone, delivering stuff, walking dogs, whatever." Damien still had his smartphone, though he'd downgraded his plan to the cheapest option available. He downloaded several gig economy apps and spent the day signing up for everything he qualified for: food delivery, pet sitting, handyman work, tutoring. By the end of the week, he had several $100 from a combination of food deliveries made using his car while he still had it, and tutoring high school students in math and business concepts. It wasn't much compared to what he'd once had, but it was earned honestly, and there was something satisfying about the immediate connection between work and reward. Meanwhile, Jayden had his own money-making schemes. He ran errands for elderly residents in nearby apartments, collected recyclables for the deposit money, and occasionally helped local shop owners with simple tasks. Despite his youth, he had a keen understanding of economics and value exchange. "You're smart," Damien told him one evening as they pooled their resources to buy ingredients for a simple meal they could cook on a camping stove in the warehouse. "Have you ever thought about going back to school?" Jayden's face darkened. "School's not for kids like me. Teachers just see a problem, not a person." "And the other kids?" He trailed off. "What if you had a tutor?" Damien suggested. "Someone to help you one-on-one. I could teach you. Math, business, whatever you want to learn." "Why would you do that?" "Because you've been teaching me," Damien said simply, "and because you're too smart to not have every opportunity." So began another phase of their relationship. Each evening, after their respective money-making activities, they would meet at the warehouse. Damien would help Jayden with reading, writing, and mathematics, while Jayden continued to teach Damien the unwritten rules of survival on society's margins. One night, as Damien was explaining compound interest using pennies as visual aids, Jayden asked, "Do you think you'll ever be rich again?" Damien considered the question. "I don't know. Maybe not billions rich, but I still know how business works. I still have ideas. If I can find my footing again, build something solid." "What would you do differently?" Jayden pressed. The question hit Damien like a physical blow. What would he do differently? Everything. "I'd be more careful about who I trusted," he began slowly. "I'd build something with real value, not just something that makes money. I'd remember that success isn't just about wealth, and I'd make sure I was helping others along the way, not just myself." Jayden nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Then you'd be rich in the ways that matter." 2 months after their first meeting, disaster struck. While Damien was out doing a food delivery, the abandoned warehouse was raided by police responding to complaints from a neighboring property owner. Jayden managed to escape, but all their belongings were confiscated or destroyed. When Damien returned to find police tape across the entrance and no sign of Jayden, panic seized him. He spent hours searching the boy's usual haunts: the library, the Vietnamese restaurant, the park where he sometimes went during the day. Finally, as evening fell, he found Jayden huddled in an alley, face tear-streaked, despite his attempts to look tough. "I lost everything," the boy said, his voice cracking. "My books, my blankets, everything." Damien sat down beside him on the cold pavement. "Are you hurt?" "Number just... I thought I had it figured out, you know. Thought I was doing okay." "You were," Damien assured him. "You are. This is just a setback." "A setback," Jayden repeated, the adult word sounding strange in his young voice. "Like what happened to you?" "Exactly like that. And what do we do with setbacks?" "We ... Jayden wiped his face with his sleeve. "We figure out the next move." Damien nodded, putting an arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "That's right, and I think I know what our next move should be." That night, using the last of his credit limit on a card that hadn't yet been cancelled, Damien got them a basic motel room. It was far from luxury, but it had clean beds, a shower, and most importantly, security. As Jayden slept, exhausted from the day's trauma, Damien sat at the small desk, making calculations. His gig work was bringing in just enough to survive, but not enough to provide any stability or future for either of them. He needed to think bigger. The next morning, after Jayden had showered and they'd eaten a simple breakfast from the vending machine, Damien shared his plan. "I'm going to start a business," he announced. "A small one for now, but something that can grow." Jayden looked skeptical. "Don't you need money for that? Like investment capital and stuff?" Damien smiled at the boys' vocabulary, a result of their evening lessons. "Usually, yes, but I'm thinking of a service business that requires minimal startup costs, technology consulting." "Like fixing computers?" "More like helping small businesses use technology better, setting up systems, training people, building simple websites and apps. It's something I know how to do, and there's always demand." "But who's gonna hire you?" Jayden asked practically. "Won't they Google you and find out about your company failing?" It was a valid concern. Damien's name was still associated with scandal in most search results. "I'll use a different business name," he decided, "and I'll start small, with local businesses that need help, but can't afford the big consulting firms." That afternoon, they visited a print shop where Damien used some of their limited funds to create simple business cards for Phoenix Digital Solutions, a name that felt appropriate for his attempted rebirth from the ashes of failure. Their first client came through Mrs. Nguyen. Her restaurant was still using a paper ordering system and handwritten receipts, and she wanted to modernize but couldn't afford the expensive systems sold to larger restaurants. Damien offered to set up a simple digital ordering and inventory system for a fraction of the usual cost. Working late into the night at the motel, using his laptop and free public Wi-Fi, Damien cobbled together a solution using open-source software and basic coding skills he hadn't utilized since his early days as an entrepreneur. Jayden watched, fascinated, asking questions and offering surprisingly insightful suggestions. Mrs. Nguyen was delighted with the result, and word began to spread among other small business owners in the neighborhood. A laundromat owner needed help setting up online booking. A bodega wanted a basic inventory management system. A flower shop needed a website and social media strategy. None of these clients paid much individually, but collectively, they provided enough income for Damien to rent a small studio apartment in a modest building. It was a far cry from his former penthouses, but it had a fold-out couch for Jaden, a functional kitchen, and reliable Wi-Fi, luxuries compared to the warehouse. As Phoenix Digital Solutions gained more clients, Damien faced a new challenge: Jaden's legal status. The boy was still technically a runaway from the foster care system, and while no one had come looking for him yet, their more stable living situation increased the risk of discovery. "We need to make this official," Damien told Jaden one evening, as they ate dinner at their small kitchen table. "You need to be in school, have regular medical care, all the things a kid should have." Jaden's fork clattered to his plate. "You're sending me back?" "No," Damien said firmly. "I'm saying, what if I became your foster parent, or even adopted you, eventually?" The boy stared at him, disbelief warring with hope on his young face. "They'd never let someone like you take a kid. You were on the news for losing all your money." "I'm not the same person I was then," Damien said. "I have a legitimate business now, a stable home, and I can provide for you. It won't be easy to convince the authorities, but I think we can make a case." The process was indeed challenging. Damien had to be vetted by social services, undergo background checks, and prove his financial stability, all while contending with his very public past failures. But he approached the task with the same determination he'd once applied to building his corporate empire, and gradually the barriers began to fall. A sympathetic social worker, impressed by the obvious bond between Damien and Jaden, and by the positive changes in the boy's behavior and academic progress, became their advocate. A judge, weary of seeing children bounced between inadequate foster placements, was willing to give an unconventional arrangement a chance. 6 months after they'd first met, Jaden legally became Damien's foster child, with the possibility of adoption in the future if all continued to go well. The boy's reaction to the news was uncharacteristically emotional. "So I'm staying." "For real? No more running away?" "For real," Damien confirmed, his own eyes suspiciously moist. "This is your home now. We're family." Jaden threw himself into Damien's arms, the first time he'd initiated such contact, and for a moment they just held on to each other, two souls who had been adrift and had somehow, against all odds, found an anchor in one another. With Jaden's legal status secured, life settled into a new rhythm. The boy enrolled in school, struggling at first with the structure and social dynamics, but gradually finding his footing thanks to Damien's patient support and tutoring. Phoenix Digital Solutions continued to grow, adding more clients and expanding its service offerings. 1 year after his financial collapse, Damien received an unexpected email from Sarah Chen, a former colleague who had been one of the few to maintain contact after his downfall. She was now at a venture capital firm specializing in tech startups and had been following Phoenix Digital's quiet success with interest. "We should talk," she wrote. "I think what you're building has potential beyond small business solutions." Over coffee at a modest cafe, a far cry from the exclusive restaurants where they'd once dined, Sarah proposed an investment that would allow Phoenix Digital to scale up significantly. The terms were fair, reflecting both the company's promising trajectory and the risk associated with Damien's tarnished reputation. Why now? Damien asked, suspicious of sudden interest after a year of struggle. Why me, with all my baggage? Sarah was candid. Partly because I always respected your business acumen, even when things went wrong. Partly because what you're building now shows a different approach, more sustainable, more community-focused. And partly, she added with a smile, because I like backing underdogs who have something to prove. After careful consideration and lengthy discussions with Jaden, who had become his unofficial business advisor despite being only 11, Damien accepted the investment with one condition: that a percentage of profits would be dedicated to a foundation supporting homeless and at-risk youth. With the influx of capital, Phoenix Digital expanded rapidly. Damien hired a small team, secured office space in a renovated warehouse, a nod to his and Jaden's shared history, and developed proprietary software that combined the best elements of the custom solutions he'd created for his small business clients. The company's focus on affordable technology solutions for underserved businesses, those too small for enterprise systems but too complex for off-the-shelf products, filled a significant market gap. Within 2 years, Phoenix Digital had clients across the country and was beginning to attract attention from industry analysts who praised its innovative approach. Damien, once known for his lavish lifestyle and aggressive business tactics, now became recognized for his commitment to ethical business practices, community involvement, and work-life balance. He made it home for dinner with Jaden every night, attended the boys' school events without fail, and took genuine weekends off, things he'd never done during his billionaire days. As for Jaden, the stability and support transformed him. Though still street-smart and occasionally cynical beyond his years, he blossomed in school, showing particular aptitude for mathematics and computer science. The boy who had once scoffed at education now talked about college scholarship possibilities and future career paths. On Jaden's 13th birthday, a date they'd officially established based on when they'd first met, Damien surprised him with the news that their adoption application had been approved. Jaden Cole was now, legally, Damien's son. "Does this mean I get to be a rich kid now?" Jaden joked, though his voice was thick with emotion. "Not rich like I was before," Damien replied, "but comfortable, yes, and more importantly, you'll always have a home and a family, regardless of bank balances." As Phoenix Digital continued its upward trajectory, Damien was occasionally approached by journalists wanting to chronicle his comeback story. He declined most interviews, preferring to keep his focus on building something sustainable rather than seeking the limelight. When he did speak publicly, it was usually in service of the foundation he'd established, now a significant force in providing education, housing, and career opportunities for youth who had experienced homelessness. Jaden often accompanied him to these events, offering his perspective as someone who had lived the reality they were trying to change. 5 years after their first meeting, Phoenix Digital Solutions merged with a larger tech company in a deal that made Damien wealthy again. Not billionaire wealthy, but certainly rich by most standards. The media painted it as the perfect redemption arc, the fallen titan who had rebuilt himself from nothing. But for Damien, the true measure of his recovery had little to do with the money. It was in the relationship he'd built with Jaden, who was now 15 and talking about creating his own startup someday. It was in the foundation that had helped hundreds of kids find pathways out of poverty, It was in the business he'd built ethically, treating employees, clients, and communities with respect. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their comfortable but not ostentatious home, Jaden asked, "Do you ever miss it? Being super rich, I mean. Private jets and all that stuff." Damien considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the convenience," he admitted, "being able to go anywhere, do anything, without worrying about cost. But I don't miss the person I was then." What was wrong with that person? He measured success by the wrong metrics. He thought wealth and power were the ultimate goals, not the tools they actually are. And he was lonely, though he didn't realize it until he lost everything. Jaden nodded thoughtfully. "I was lonely too, before, even though I acted like I had it all figured out." "We saved each other," Damien said simply. "You taught me how to survive when I'd forgotten the basics. You reminded me what really matters. And hopefully, I've given you opportunities you might not have had otherwise." "You gave me a home," Jaden said quietly. "That's more than opportunity. That's everything." As night fell over the city, the same city where they'd once been a desperate billionaire and a defiant street kid, Damien reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. He had lost a fortune and found something far more valuable: purpose, perspective, and a family forged in adversity. He wasn't the man he had been, ruling his empire from glass towers. He was something better: a builder of bridges instead of walls, a mentor instead of a master, a father instead of merely a success story. And Jaden, once a child with nowhere warm to go, was now a teenager with not just shelter, but a future bright with possibilities. Together, they had rewritten both their stories, from riches to ruin to redemption, and from survival to security to success. It wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was one they had built together, piece by piece, from the rubble of what came before. And that made it more precious than any fortune could ever be.